got some hand reviews. Let's see here if this is working. All right, looks good. Okay, I'm going to go over some hands from yesterday and then jump into the next section on the 4 betting. So let's see here. Hang on, let me turn this down because I'm hearing myself way too much. There we go. Early on in the tournament day, King Queen, pretty simple defense, no real need for a 3-bet. King's okay, goes check. Player over here bets with no 3-bet pre-flop. With these stack sizes, this can be literally anything. It's a fairly easy call, as you can see, versus the deck. We're about 2/3. Pick up the club draw, pretty good. Should kill action unless the player actually has a very strong ace, which he shouldn't. Checks back, 7 on the river. I decided to just check. Player checks back. This is one where you started and end with a bluff catcher that can be very profitable, and a lot of times players will take one shot, especially early on multi-way, and these little calls kind of make it really good for you. And actually called this guy's hand that he had pocket 10s, because it kind of makes sense now. If he had 3-bet at pre-flop, he could have bet at any point in this hand and gotten the fold, but oh well. So just an interesting little simple hand that he didn't even need to lose a chip. Like he could have just 3-bet pre-flop, probably take it down, but he missed it. People tend to 3-bet later in tournaments more than earlier, which is a huge mistake. This hand, I think, is just a funny one. I'm not sure. 4-way pot. We make the king again. Player in latest position. When it's checked to the guy who acts last, I always kind of take a little bit of emphasis off the strength of his hand, because he is the guy who got to see how everybody acted and then go ahead and bet. And it's a pretty simple 1/3 pot bet. I definitely think we can call. I think at the time I said I had a good feeling about this, and when the deuce came off, I said that's why. Check. He bets 2/3 pot. I really thought he was going to go kind of bananas on the river, so I decided to just call this. But he ended up checking back, which I guess makes sense since he had an ace. I was kind of surprised by this turn bet. That being said, I don't think I get any more money, because if he's not willing to bet the river for value when this safe river comes off, like I should just have a lot of second pairs, third pairs, things like that. Like the deuce is kind of whatever. I mean, I guess maybe if he had ace jack, he may have bet, but I think he missed a bet most of the time. It just seemed to work out for him here. Pocket deuces. We go ahead and defend in the cutoff. Go 3 ways again, flop the deuce. This player had been doing this a ton. These little min-bet donks. And the thing of it is, when players do this, it really can't be looked at as a bet until the player starts check raising. When you raise here, you need to just start raising these, because they're just going to fold. Next player made it 2.5, and this I think was a good idea because he actually underbet, meaning that his hand could be stronger than is expected. He didn't want to get tagged as a draw, and this should make this player fold every time. When it got to me, I thought for a second, and then I decided it was a good idea to raise right now, because the initial raiser wasn't going to come along, and I wasn't 100% sure what this guy had, but this bet seems strong to me, so I'm really only worried about him having pocket kings and pocket eights, I guess. I don't know if he's ever raising even this much on the draw, because the bet's just way too small. So to me, his hand signified strength, and I was trying to determine whether or not I was beat. So I just went with the raise, and when he calls, I absolutely don't feel like he has a set here. This should be ace-king a ton. It should be some flush draws, but not many. This can also be hands that are kind of weird, like queens. It can be aces. But either way, I just felt like at this point I was absolutely 100% good. And what's the best way to get all the money in? I decided to bet sort of smallish on the turn. It is 2/3, a little under 2/3 pot, but it's pretty definitive because at this point I have 32 blinds left. If he calls, there's going to be 59, almost 60 blinds in the pot, and there's going to be no way he's going to be able to fold the river. And when you put a player in this position, if they're at all scared that you may outdraw them, they are going to go ape shit. And he checked, and that's exactly what happened. We got him to check raise jam. Snap called it, and of course he rolled over the ace king. And the thing about it is, betting that turn and raising that flop was important because, see, we got 124 blind pot out of this by raising that flop. Just this small raise here, which this is about half pot at this point. It bulked the pot all the way up to 27 blinds, which now it's super easy to get the money in. And we just don't need action killers to come off. So betting the turn is kind of inconsequential. We just want to bet bigger than half so it don't look like we're ultimately trapping. But this is the kind of bet where you're going to make the player make a decision. And I think with ace-king, most of the time he's going to be correct here to jam because I look like I'm full of shit. But without him having knowledge of me, I think it's obviously it's a mistake. But I think you see this very commonly where you kind of like, that raise in the flop is kind of like, do you have a king? And, you know, if you have a flush draw, you can absolutely do that. And the turn bet was so small that it looks like I'm trying to 3-barrel but preserve my stack and not commit. So we made him put us in, which was a nice play. Let's see. Ace-10. This is interesting to me. Goes raise, gets called. I decide to make a standard C-bet. Turn comes off, and I bet again. And the river comes off, and I gave up on this one. I just didn't feel like I was going to get the fold because I needed the diamond or heart draw to come through, I think. I just felt like I was up against the king a lot. Player does check back, which is hilarious to me. And he had pocket nines, which this is one that I have to say results-oriented is a mistake. But here's the problem. This is why I backed off of it. And I thought about this hand a lot last night. He doesn't have much left. The wrinkle that is the problem here is that this is a bounty tournament. So it should look like I'm working him up to a pot size bet and putting him in. Problem is I didn't pull the... So I think this is a mistake. I definitely think if he had a king or a flush draw, logically he would have jammed the turn when he had a pot size bet left. The only real way that I should be checking here is if I truly believe my opponent has something amazing, like a set, which I truly didn't think he did, because his stack started, you know, at 40 blinds. He's going to 3-bet with all ace kings. He's going to, you know, 3-bet good pairs, you know, things like queens and stuff like that are getting sticky. He's going to, you know, get it in on the turn with a set, you know, of fives or deuces. So I think this is a clear mistake by me. Looking back, in the moment, it was very hard to do because, you know, you only have so much time. But I think if I was able to, you know, Zach Morris, Saved by the Bell, time out, and really think about this hand on the river, I want to believe that with all the time in the world and no timing tells and nothing affecting it, I really believe that if I had jammed here, I would have gotten the fold because this player wasn't fuck it, I'm just going to call kind of guy. If this guy has a king, I'm going to go out, but if not, he's not. But we were invested in this tournament. It was a little deeper. So this is a mistake. This is just very easily a mistake because I'm representing this king, and what would I do with this king on this river is I would jam. I would not check and try to get him to bet. So it's a mistake, and I acknowledge it. It's not a huge one. I didn't lose a huge pot. I definitely was in good position in the tournament. Losing this many blinds would have been detrimental to what I was doing, so I can understand it, but I think in the end, I think this is a failure here. So I wanted to point that out, that sometimes it's good to acknowledge what you do wrong as well as you do right. Pocket tens, I raise out of first, get called. Yeah, this is a fun one. This is illustrating how players, sometimes you just have to bet twice. This is kind of one of those. This player leads out small. This doesn't make much sense. I was the pre-flop raiser. You're in the blind. Why would you lead out into me? To me, this is what used to be very prevalent in poker, the probe bet. I want to find out where I'm at. And you see how small this bet is. This is a quarter pot. So it's kind of like, you know, if you don't have a jack, you can't continue. Well, that might be true. But if I have something really good, I'm just going to call. So I decided to call and see what he does. Plus, I can have a lot of ace kings, ace queens, things like that. He checks, and I decide to turn my hand into a bluff. looking at the scare card on the turn. I think if the ace hadn't come off, he may have bet again, but I kind of doubt it. But I bet and just took it down. And this is one of those ones where you kind of have to let the pot develop. And you got to realize my position coming out of first looks super scary to these players, especially when he leads out and I just call. Like, raising is actually weaker than just calling on this flop because it's like you're afraid of nothing. You know what I mean? So, like, all over pairs, sets, you know, that's what they would do. So I think this is just one where keeping a pretty much overview of the situation you're in kind of won me this pot, and I think that was a good little thing to recognize. Pocket kings. Why are we looking at pocket kings? So this player just jams. Oh, I remember why. So this player jams all in, and before this happened, I said what was going to happen in this hand. This one's more for a video, for a funny video on TikTok, but this player calls, and you look. I have 67 blinds starting this hand. I immediately, as soon as this player called, I just jammed all in. And this is how bad people play bounty tournaments. This guy is willing to put in 2/3 of his chips with pocket fours. This is the thing, because he was after this guy's bounty. This guy's bounty, by the way, was $4. This was not worth the risk that this guy put himself in the tournament. He crippled himself and he ended up going out, and this just vaulted me into an amazing position in the tournament. That went really well until I took a couple beats. But this just shows you like how crazy people play in bounty tournaments, and now we know how he got those 90 blinds was by doing dumb shit like this and sucking out. So it was the fact of going super fast that got it. It was like, you know, all in, call, jam. It was like immediate. So 4 deuce. See him in raise. I do defend for 5-1 on my money. Comes off with a bunch of aces. Goes check, check, 1 bet. This was the player who was betting 1 blind quite often again. Gets called here. I decide to float. This is kind of risky when you have 2 people floating. 4 on the turn. Basically feel like I could be good here a lot. Player bets 1 big blind. This guy calls. Now we decide to go ahead and pull the trigger. If you had an ace, this is what you would do here. Nobody with an ace is betting 1 blind. Nobody with an ace is calling 1 blind. The only real thing that we're worried about is somebody having, this player here having 5 deuce for the straight. But again, it's very unlikely. And they just fold. And this is one where, yeah, I picked up showdown value, but it was important to bet it because any card beats my showdown hand. I was basically going to be done with the hand if I didn't hit anything. But I think when I pick up some form of showdown, I think it's worth betting. I was planning on check raising like a jack on this turn or a 10, but nothing higher than that really. So the 4 was just perfect setup because it's just so unlikely somebody has something good. And holding the deuce, very unlikely somebody has 5 deuce. So this is a nice little check raise. This is my favorite hand of the day yesterday. So I raise, folds, small blind. Now you see we're both super deep, right? Small blind raises to 3x. Pretty standard. We decide to go ahead and call. Now we are not at a full table, but it's okay. Flop comes off with an ace on it. And this is a situation that people face all the time where you just give up the pot. The timing and the overall aggressive nature of this player made me think twice. So he bets out a quarter pot, and I decide, you know what? All these things put together, I really don't think he has an ace. I'm going to be making a video and putting it out, but I did say I want to make this raise in case we're up against kings, queens, jacks, tens, you know, hands that beat me but can't continue too much. He takes a super long time, and this bet isn't huge. You know, he takes a super long time, and then he calls. And here's the hard part is you really have to pull the trigger. It sucks when a 10 comes off because he can obviously have 10s here quite a bit. I pull the trigger on the turn for 20 blinds, and he just folds. And he did show us the hand. I wonder if it'll show us. Where is it? Show known hole cards. Yeah, he ended up showing that he had pocket queens and folded. And this to me is just a great example of not taking things at face value. Like he wanted just an easy, well, I give up. You know what I'm saying? Like if I had called the flop, I would have had to bet the turn and bet the river. And he may have even talked himself into calling. But when I check raise the flop, or when I raise the flop and then bet the turn, he just cannot continue. This was my favorite hand of the day. And I really loved it. He actually showed the queens and folded, which That's why you never show cards. You never want to let somebody know they did it something so good and owned you. So never show your hand if you don't have to. Pocket fours. This is a fun hand. This is my second favorite hand. So player raises 2 big blinds. I'm in a small blind. I decide to just call with the fours. And big blind doesn't even defend, which is interesting. Flop comes off pretty bad for me. I check. Player took a very long time and then decided to check back. Okay, he should be betting range here. And when somebody does something so out of the ordinary, plus the guy had a high C-bet ratio of like 75%. When somebody does something out of the ordinary, you kind of have to keep an eye open for something being out of the ordinary. So I was thinking maybe it's possible he lucked into a 5, or maybe he has a flush draw. He could have ace-king and be a good player, but I didn't really see him as a very good player. Good player checks ace-king here. Deuce on the turn. I check. He immediately checks back. Make the 4 on the river for the full house. And I made this bet, and then I said, there is a chance here that he has pocket kings or even pocket 5s, so I don't think we can call too much of a raise. He min-clicked it back, and this is one of those ones where I said, I feel like I'm beat here, but statistically it's so unlikely that I need to be able to sleep at night, so I'm going to call the 3 big blinds and get my pat on the back for not going broke, because this is the most disguised hand in poker, the rivered full house. And he rolls over pocket kings. And I think losing 6 blinds on this, or what was it, 9 blinds total on this pot, and 6 blinds after the guy flopped me dead, I think is a pretty big victory. So I was definitely happy with this hand, and just was very dialed in yesterday. And where we got pocket 6s. I decided to go ahead and defend the button. Flop comes off pretty rough, but I decided to go ahead and bet because I feel like this player should be betting range, but it's 3 players, so he's not going to. I think the queen should bet from here, so I bet. This player called, the other one folded. King clubs on the turn, really not a great card for me. I decide to check back. I'm kind of taking a different line now. Player checks the river, and I decide to go for the value bet that I would have with a straight or a flush here. I'm kind of representing a big hand, and when you're representing a big hand, it's very hard for somebody to call you without a big hand. So he could have just had nothing, but honestly, this is a situation where somebody's going to roll over pocket 10s or pocket jacks on you quite often, but he just folds. And I think it's important to realize that the bet on the flop, check on the turn, bet on the river is what sold it. Because if you think about it, if I had a queen, I would bet the flop, I would check the turn, and I would bet the river. But more so than that, if I had a, Jack 10, or if I had, a flush draw and that hit on the turn, I would do the exact same thing. So this bet on the river is really well done because it's also undersized. It's a little over 2/3 pot. It's not a true value bet, which would be about 13 or 14 blinds. So it kind of looks like I'm begging for a call. And when you're begging for a call, people with moderate hands don't call you. Pocket 10s, pocket jacks can't call here. So I like it. Oh, this jack deuce is funny. Player jams all in. This is the bounty tournament again. This is just a funny hand for a video. And I have a ton of blinds. He had a pretty big bounty. And I decided to call it because I have to call it. And ran it out, jack and deuce on the river, and he had pocket kings. But here's the thing. This player let himself get way too low, so he has to get called. With his bounty, it was like calling, what was it? It was 12 blinds on the flop. Yeah, or 15 blinds. So it cost me 14 to win, whatever this was, 18 and a half. So that's already okay with 44% equity versus the deck. But the fact of the matter is his bounty was so big, it's like a $6 bounty, that you can add like an extra, I think like 25 blinds to this. So imagine calling 14 and a half blinds to win, what is this? Like 45 blinds. So it's kind of automatic, you know what I'm saying? And I'm well within my right to do it. That's the way you figure out bounty tournaments, is based on the value of their bounty, how much their chip stack is more valuable. So, interesting hand, just a fun one for a TikTok that'll be put out later this week. See a raise, I decided to go ahead and just call. Could have 3-bet this, but this player was kind of short-stacked and a little conservative, so flop comes off, and I decided to go ahead and bet. Player does call. At this point, I'm kind of twisted in the wind because he doesn't have a lot of chips, so it's kind of dicey here. He checks, and I decide to go ahead and bet again, just a little over half pot, and he folds. And this, to me, is the quintessential example of sometimes you just got to bet twice. People now know not to fold on flops for whatever reason. Like he could have pocket sevens here and just not want to fold on the flop. He didn't get what he wanted pre-flop as a race, so I'm glad I didn't 3-bet. But this is why I didn't want to 3-bet a player with such a short stack, because they're so prone to getting it in. So betting twice here, it's very hard for a hand to take that heat. And the turn is really where you win the majority of your pots in these situations. Let's see, pocket nines. See a raise. I decided to just call this one because we are kind of all even, and I'm kind of looking to just flop good and get it in. Flop comes off with an ace on it. Plus, I'm keeping my range wide. Nobody's really defended their hand or defined their hand. It goes check around. I decide to bet the turn, super small, and we do get one call from the button. And here's another good example of how you can bet twice and win the pot. This could even be a hand as strong as a 10. They just have to show you betting twice. Now, honestly, he could have a lot of draws. He could have had, a king 10 or something like that, or even 2 clubs. But again, gotta bet twice. Gotta bet twice. Keep on betting. And these bets don't have to be big. 1/3 pot, 2/3 pot on the turn. Maybe 1/3 on the turn, and like there, half pot on the river. These bets didn't have to be huge, but they make a point of your betting. So you kind of have to keep going. Pocket jacks. This is the Jedi mind trick number 11, by the way. The one, the Bloodsport one. That's what we're talking about here. The keep betting. Don't stop. Keep going. I raise, get called, get defended. I decide to go ahead and bet. Player does call. Ace on the turn. I decide to bet again. Player folds. This is one where I think the ace would slow people down. And here's the problem. If you check the turn here because of this ace, your opponent is going to bet the river. And this player was very deep. He was very move happy. And I didn't want to give him the opportunity. If I take a $6 or six big blind bet here and he decides to continue, I'm going to check the river. And we're just going to get shown like queen 10 or something like that. But if I check the turn and he bets the river, and he could bet the river for, there's 10 in the pot at that point. He could bet the river for 8 or 9 big blinds. I'm already risking more than I should, and I have to make this hero call with this stupid ace on board. I like just controlling the size of the pot and just betting again and making him make the decision. A lot of times players will just call you with the intent of betting the river to bluff. But, you have to use what the board does to your advantage. This is an interesting one. I decided to raise. I wanted to run the numbers on this. That's why this hand is here. So we're going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to bring up the tools section of Jonathan Little's poker coaching site. I wanted to run the numbers here. So GTO tournament preflop charts. I think that's the one we can use. Yeah, not the push fold. Okay, so the situation here is we have King Jack with an effective stack of 16 big blinds in the big blind. We're in the small. So we're going to say 15 big blinds. My position is the small blind. We're raising first in. King Jack suited should just be a call. Okay, so I made a mistake here. I should have just limped from the small blind. Okay, so that's a little bit of a mistake, but I was being aggressive. The player was a little bit looser than ever, so whatever. So how about this one? Now we are facing an all-in from the opponent's position of the big blind. Oh, wait a minute. Facing an all-in. I don't know if we can find it in here. Oh, you know what? It might be the push-fold charts. Let's go back to the tools section and see. Push-fold charts. Okay. Let's see if we can find it here. So our position is the small blind. The effective stack is 16 blinds. Adjustment, no. Seats, 8. Big blind anti-type, and all like that. Let's see here. We're calling an all-in from the small blind for 16 effective big blinds against the Well, the button says King 10 off, King Jack off. All right, that's fine. There's no... I don't think there's a way to find the answer here without using... I don't think there's a way to find the answer here without using a solver. I think it's close. I'm interested. I was very interested to see that the pre-flop, it should have just been a call. If it was just a call, so let's see, versus an all-in from the opponent's position of the, well, there is no big blind. So, yeah. Yeah, there's no way to really figure this one. I think it's close. Basically, this is what happened. I raised, and I'm willing to get it in here. I think it's reasonable. I didn't realize that the call should be... You know what? It's probably a call and then a call off versus a jam. So it's probably the same thing. He does jam. Obviously, I'm going to call here. And he just ran out. He just had a shitty ace. The fact that he jammed over my raise kind of tells me that I was right about the player. He probably should have just called and then let me bluff into him if he hits, but I don't think jamming the ace deuce for 15 blinds is ever a good idea here in the big blind, because you're only going to get called by something that crushes you. My raise pre-flop, I guess, might have been a mistake. So maybe because he's so short, maybe I should have just called it, I guess. Let's see here. Got the ace king. Good to see you guys coming out. Appreciate it. All this will be posted on YouTube if you want to go back through the hands. Raise, big blind defends. I decided to go ahead and check flop. This is one where I just have it locked up. I have 30 blinds. I'm trying to get them all in a favorable situation. Turn comes off at 3, and the player now starts betting. For me, this is one of two things. He's in the blind, so he's either got me crushed or I have him crushed. So I just go ahead and call. The river comes off, and it's a 5. He bets reasonably for half pot. I'm not of the opinion that he has a 4. So I decided to just call it because I feel like he's never going to fold something that beats me. It's one of those situations, and we are kind of deeper in a tournament. I just took a beat a few hands ago, so I decided, winning this pot would be just fine for me. Another 24 blinds in my stack would put me back up there. And he got lucky on me on the river. Now, the thing about this hand is, if I had bet the flop, would he have folded? No. If we'd gotten it all in on the turn, would he have folded? No. If we had gotten, bet by the river, would he have folded? Most likely scenario for a fold is that, but no. So this is one where trapping and playing just a little cautiously preserved my tournament life, and I only lost about a third of my chips in a situation where I should not be able to double up. I shouldn't be able to double up here because he should be bluffing most of the time. So raising at any point in this hand served absolutely no purpose. There's really nothing to protect here. So it's just unlucky. If you want to talk about it on the turn here, we're 84%. Obviously, if we show the known hole cards, we're 81%. On the flop, we're 81%. If you want to even go pre-flop, when it comes down to just us, I'm 72%. So, this is not one where I had to protect anything. People think that this is a mistake, that they've whatever, but no. At no point is this player folding. Because think about it. Is he folding on the flop to a, 2.2 bet? No. God, no. Is he folding on the turn when he picks up outs, to now a 9, big blind bet or 8 big blind bet? No. And then is he folding to a jam on the river? Obviously not. He's going to check call, or he's just going to jam into me, and there's going to be no way I'm going to be able to fold with this many chips left. So this is one that I like. This is a more advanced, experienced tournament poker player situation where playing for the trap and then getting sucked out on preserved your tournament life. Now here's the thing. If he hadn't hit it, he would have bet bigger. On the river, the thing to remember, he bet half pot here trying to get called. I think, honestly, if he had a hand like ace-10, or even if he just had a stone bluff, this bet would have been much bigger. So I think my line is even stronger there, because we're going to get 9 to 10 blinds out of him on the river. So I really love the way I played this one, even though it's a loss. I think it's very well done. Okay. Good to see you guys here. A couple people came filtering in. Gone over the hands from yesterday. Let's go ahead and get into the next lesson. This is flop strategies playing 4-bet pots. And this first section is going to be as the pre-flop aggressor. Not too long of a section. 4-bet kind of becomes simple after a bit. So let me make sure I have the desktop audio on. And I'll adjust it in a second here. Let's get started.
4-bet pots on the flop. So general adjustments, you're going to find that so far many of the ideas we discussed apply very much to 4-bet pots, except for there are going to be a few key differences compared to single raised and 3-bet pots. And that is that the stack to pot ratio is going to be substantially lower now. Also, ranges are going to be much stronger and more clearly defined. And you're going to find that these clearly defined ranges have massive implications on post-flop strategy. So let's first take a look at 4-bet pots as the pre-flop aggressor on the flop. This is actually very, very similar to when you're playing in a 3-bet pot, except for now stack to pot ratio is even shorter, which will result in you betting even smaller. Typically with the range advantage, you're going to want to be betting very frequently, probably about 100% of the time, using a small bet size of 25% pot, maybe even lower. You can get away with betting very, very tiny in 4-bet pots when you have the range advantage. When you do opt to have a checking range, you're going to find that the super nuts, like top set, middle set, bottom set, 2 pairs, these hands are the hands that start to check first. And that's because your opponent's in terrible shape. When your opponent's in terrible shape, you don't really care if they get to see the flop, the turn, the river cheaply, right? You will see sometimes when your stack to pot ratio is really shallow, either because you started with a shallower stack or maybe the 4-bet size was big. Then you're going to find that once the stack to pot ratio dips below 1, that going all in may be ideal, especially on boards that are somewhat connected, which make it to where you lack a range advantage. Like when you start to lack a range advantage, you're going to find that you do want to start betting using a slightly bigger size. Without a range advantage, which first off will rarely actually occur in 4-bet pots due to the tight, well-defined ranges, you're going to want to be checking a ton when you do lack the range advantage, especially when you're out.
This is as the 4-better. So somebody raised, somebody re-raised, we 3-bet out of position, or we 4-bet out of position, like from the small blind. Checking a ton out of position is reasonable there because our range is just so nutted. It's big pairs, it's ace-king suited, it's things like that. So we're going to be checking out of position a ton. And even when we like the flop, even when we want to get all the money in, that's going to be the move because we're trying to make it look like we don't want to get the money in.
Out of position. However, if the stack to pot ratio is close to 1, you're going to find that you want to jam. You want to go all in with hands that have good equity but benefit from protection, like over pairs, top pairs, middle pairs, etc. Basically, if your hand's decent enough when we're kind of shallow, you probably just want to get it all in. That said, when we are playing very, very shallow, you still want to slow play the nuts because you don't need to bet to build the pot. And the odds that your opponent has the super nuts or the draw that can outdraw your super nut hand is pretty low. So you really don't need to do a whole lot of betting with your absolute best hands. And they also help protect your checking range, right? Which should be a lot of your range. 4-bet pots are interesting. We're going to see some examples in just a second where you actually do a lot of checking whenever you lack the range advantage. All right, a few positional adjustments really quick. When you're in position, as a general rule, bet slightly more frequently using small sizes. And when we are out of position, we're going to want to be betting a little bit less often. But when we are betting, we're going to want to use a large size. And sometimes that size is all in. So let's go through a few scenarios. Notice here I've changed the stack sizes to be 60 big blinds instead of 40. These ideas all still apply, and they're even more egregious when you're shallower stacked, to the point you just do a lot of betting when you have the range advantage, a lot of checking when you don't. So these strategies all apply. I wanted to show you a little bit deeper stacked though.
The reason why it has to be deeper stacked is because at 40 big blinds, if you raise and somebody, if you're in the low jack and you raise to 2, whatever. Somebody re-raises to 7, and the cutoff, your re-raise is going to be to like 20. You've got more than a third of your chips in the pot. The move there is just the jam 4-bet. There's really not a lot of smaller 4-bets at that point, just because mostly that's going to mean the jig is up. And if you want to get called with aces or kings there, shove it in, because it's going to look weaker than making this small 3-bet now, or small 4-bet. I have 4-bet bluffed in final table situations like this, where I felt like a player was just re-raising far too often. So early on, I've set the tempo by 4-betting small like that, going to like, 15 or 18 over his 7 big blind raise, and you just watch them snap fold, and they back off. And this is usually when the chip leader is on your left and you're a middle stack, and you need them to back off so that you don't just always, you're not just always getting raised every time you come in with a hand, because they have so many chips. So it's a good move to back them off because it looks super strong. But at 40 big blinds, if you want to get the money in, there's no 4-bet real range to bet smaller. You just jam. Anytime you have more than a general rule of thumb, anytime I put in more than a third of my stack on a re-raise, I just jam, because there's just no reason to. You know what I'm saying? Unless we're doing something tricky. So it makes sense that we're going to 60 big blinds here because it allows for more play.
Because that still gives us a little bit of post-flop play. Because if you think about it, say we raise like 2.5 big blinds, somebody 3-bets to 7 or 8, we 4-bet to, 20? If we're playing 40 big blinds deep, we would not have 4-bet to 20, we would have just ripped it all in.
So I guess I could have just let Jonathan Little talk. I guess I really didn't need to explain that. But it's good. I like doing that and getting out ahead of it and preemptively saying why I think things are, because one, that shows me my level of understanding of the concept, and then hearing him just say it back just confirms, that I know what I'm talking about.
And pre-flop would have gone all in, and that would have been the end of the hand. So 60 big blinds deep, you still have a little bit of post-flop play, which allows for a non-all-in 4-bet pre-flop. So let's take a look at these scenarios. So let's make this really clear. We raise the cutoff. Low jack 3-bets us. We 4-bet them. They call. So we're out of position in this scenario. Flop comes ace, queen, 5. Let's take a look at our range and ask, how does this flop line up with our range? Well, aces are the nuts. Queens are the nuts. Ace, king is the nuts. Ace, jack is the nuts. Ace, 4 and ace, 3, close enough to the nuts. So what junk do we have? We have like almost no junk here, right? We have kings, which is still pretty good. We have jacks, which starts to become junk. King, queen offsuit, still okay. Then we have a sliver of other bluffs every once in a while. 7s are garbage. King 9 suit is garbage. 5s are the nuts randomly. So you see, we really don't have much garbage here. So when we don't have much garbage, that's going to lead to a very strong equity advantage. You can go through and put this in the range analyzer. You're going to see we just have a ton of premium made hands. When you have a ton of premium made hands, you're in great shape. And that allows you to bet small and frequently, which is exactly what the solver does. Okay? Turns out range analysis isn't all that hard whenever your range is very, very small, because you really only have a few hands, right? Let's take a look now. 60 big blinds, low jack versus cutoff, same positional setup. Except for now, the board's queen, 10, 8, all spades. Let's go through our range again. Aces, pretty good. Kings, pretty good. Queens are the nuts. Jacks are pretty good. 10s are the nuts. But then we have ace, king.
This is an interesting factor here. Kings, you can see this, they want to bet bigger more of the time because the hand is stronger but requires protection. But kings are actually more valuable here than aces because we're less likely to be up against a hand that we truly crush. When we have kings here, it's far less likely that our opponent has ace-king. It's just not something that we're going to see too often. So because we've taken away the kings from him, so there's not a lot of hands that don't have anything against us. So the hands that have something against us are ace-queen, our pocket aces, things like that. So we're betting half the pot on those situations to define and protect the hand and get paid when our opponent has ace-queen and king-queen, which is very likely.
King, which is not great unless it's the spades. Ace-jack, same story, not great unless it's the spades. And we have some nut flushes and then a bunch of ace-3 of diamonds, which is clearly terrible. So this is a spot where our equity advantage is going to go down quite a bit. You're going to find that the main boards that connect well with the 3-better who calls the 4-bet are going to be the high, well, the middle high connected boards. So not ace high, maybe not even king high, but like queen high and jack high boards, like queen 10-8 or queen 9-8 or jack 10-7. These boards really connect well with the caller of the 3-bet. Go back to the pre-flop section, you'll see the person who calls the 3-bet, their range lines up great with these boards. They're going to have top set, middle set, bottom set, straights, 2-pair, right? They just have all the really good hands. So in this scenario, we're going to be betting less often. Notice we're using an all-in size sometimes when we're betting, and we're using a small bet as well. Again, solver's going to mix up their bets, which makes this a little bit difficult to exactly copy. But if you slotted me into this scenario, I'd be betting my kings, my queens, my tens, probably my aces. I'd probably just check these jacks sometimes. Maybe you check the aces some portion of the time too. When we are betting here, notice that the ace of spades splits between betting big and betting small, so that's kind of neat. Notice here that ace king is actually betting 30%. Ace king suited is betting 32% of the time, which means that, well, 7% of the time you have the ace king suited. It's not a flush when you're betting, so it's bluffing those some portion of the time. Notice it's checking the ace high flush a decent amount of the time. It's only betting it 15% of the time or so. So this is a spot where it's a pretty tough spot to play. But again, this is one of the worst boards for the 4-better. So when you get a bad board, you do need to start doing some checking. Also notice whenever the board's not great for us, but we still have some high equity hands that effectively give us the nut advantage, like top set, bottom set, or top set and middle set, etc. When we are betting, we're often using a pretty big size, especially with hands that are likely good, but certainly could be susceptible to being outdrawn, like kings. Let's take a look at queen 9-8, another terrible board for the 4-better. Go through our range again. Aces, kings, queens are great, but everything else in our range is not great, right? Ace king is terrible. Ace x suited is terrible. Ace jack's terrible. King queen's okay, I suppose. Jacks and tens are fine, but you don't really want to be betting and getting your money in. So notice, out of position, we're going to be doing a whole lot of checking, right? Notice our equity is in the dumpster, 33%. Could you imagine there's a spot where you have 33% equity as the 4-better? You wouldn't think it comes up all that often, yet here it is. Queen 9-8, no suits. It's a spot where you got to do a lot of checking.
I mean, it's just so common that our opponent has tens, jacks, king, queen, ace, queen, all those situations where we may have the best hand, but we have to bet pretty damn big, and it's like a kill pot attempt. So in lieu of, doing that for 40 blinds, we're probably just checking and trying to discern if the hand is good. So it's really a shitty situation, and people don't realize, they think this board is not as connected as it is. You got to remember, when somebody has jacks here, they're never going to fold on the flop, and they're going to have 6 outs against you, which doesn't sound like much, but they're going to have 25% versus kings and aces here. So it's kind of rough. Sometimes when you have suits covered, it's different if you have ace king, but this is the one where you're checking and folding ace king after 4-betting. I mean, it just kind of sucks.
And whenever your equity is terrible, you simply must check a ton. When your equity is bad, you got to do a lot of checking. All right, let's take a look at this spot now where we are in position. So cutoff is us. We raise, small blind 3-bets. We 4-bet them, and they call. They check the flop. Flop comes 8-6-5. Again, ask, how does this board line up with the small blind's 3-betting range? Well, again, depends heavily on what their actual strategy is, but this does connect well with some of them. Sometimes we have low-suited connected type stuff. Not often, but sometimes. So this is a spot where we do have to be a little bit cautious. Also, if you go through our range, look, we actually don't have very many good hands at all here. We have kings, queens, 9s, and 8s, and aces. Everything else is pretty bad, and all these overcards that are pretty bad really can't withstand a check raise. So you have to be a little bit cautious in this scenario, betting as well.
It's always interesting to me. We don't have jacks and tens here because we're not 4-betting the jacks and tens. We're calling them. We're 4-betting the 9s and 8s because the hand's not strong enough to fade on its own, so we're trying to get that fold pre-flop. And if the player just jams on us, we can go, okay, well, these 9s are just, versus an overpair, we can give it up. But if we 4-bet the jacks and get jammed on, we're kind of higher up in our range where it's like we don't want to get it in, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, we just kind of praying that our opponent has ace king and we survive the race. we don't need to over-define the hand, so we can call and take a flop instead of 4-betting pre-flop. That's the thing that these solvers didn't make sense to me as to why these hands aren't in the range of 4-betting. Now I understand it. It's the same thing, because you would just call. You would not 4-bet. You would 4-bet queens because if somebody jammed on you, well, they have to have aces or kings to beat me, and that's one less combination of cards, without the queens being over the jacks. And we're just going to see a lot of ace-kings, aces and kings there, and that's fine. And we're going to win the majority of the time. It's going to be about 50-50 ace-king versus aces and kings. So half the time I think they're going to have about aces and kings. The other half the time they're going to have ace-king. And in that scenario, when we have queens, we don't mind 4-bet and calling it off on a 5-bet. So the 4-bet is fine. Because people will 5-bet ace-king all in from the small blind very easily. Kings, definitely the same thing. Obviously, aces, the same thing.
So this is a spot where we are going to want to do...
But you can see that aces aren't always in the 4-bet range, because if we're in the cutoff, we raise small blind 3-bets. Coming back to us in the cutoff versus the small blind, it's kind of a really good spot to just call aces instead of 4-betting, because we're monstrous, and the guy's told us he has a good hand, and his good hands are going to be things that we crush. You know what I'm saying? It's not like he's doing it with, whatever, 10 jack or something like that. It's just not happening. You know what I'm saying? So maybe calling is the move pre-flop. It looks like about 2/3 of the time with aces here. But when we do 4-bet, obviously we're very happy.
A reasonable amount of checking. But again, you see the hands that are betting most often, these overpairs that are very likely good but vulnerable to being outdrawn, kings and queens, very, 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 very often are betting. Let's take a look at one more spot here. Queen 9-8, the terrible board. So we're going to be in position now. We raise cutoff, small blind 3-bets. We 4-bet, they call, they check. This is a spot where we're checking a ton. And again, the only hands that are betting are the hands that don't mind protection, right? Like kings, aces. Queens are the nuts, but again, this board lines up so well with a small blind 3-betting range that we probably should be betting it. Also 9s and 8s bet as well. But we're doing a lot of giving up here, right? We're checking back ace-king, ace-10, ace-9's marginal made hand will call a turn bet. Queen-jack's marginal made hand will call a turn bet. But really, these ace-kings really just kind of crush us. Whenever ace-king is not a particularly great hand on the board and the board connects with your opponent's range, you just got to bite the bullet and do a lot of checking. So let's discuss some general rules as the post-flop aggressor summary. Just be pre-flop aggressor. As 4-bet pots as the, whatever, it's fine. 4-bet pots as the post-flop aggressor. So range advantage heavily drives your strategies in 4-bet pots. Let me just go through here and show you again. Just look at our equity and look how often we're betting. 64%, bet every time. 47%, check sometimes, bet sometimes. 33%, always check. 52%, 50-50 again. 39%, a lot of checking, right? So as your range advantage goes down in 4-bet pots, that's going to heavily drive your strategy, because really, nut advantage is relevant, but if you get a pretty good hand in 4-bet pots, you're just not folding it, right? So nut advantage is actually, I don't think, not quite as relevant in 4-bet pots. Really just range advantage is heavily, heavily important, or highly important. So you're typically going to want to bet often using a small size when you have the range and that nut advantage. And you're going to want to check often and use large bets, sometimes all in, when you do not have the range advantage and nut advantage, especially from out of position. And we saw it for the most part. You're going to want to slow play decently often from in both positions when you are playing in 4-bet pots as the pre-flop aggressor, because you don't need to bet to build a pot. So those are general tips for 4-bet pots. I know a lot of people kind of feel lost in these scenarios when they have a hand like ace-king in a 4-bet pot. But very often, if you just have the range advantage, it's fine to bet small and frequently. I know I didn't show you any boards like 9-4-2, but on 9-4-2, pre-flop 3-better has a big advantage. Bet it frequently, in position and out of position, you're going to be fine. Boards that are very middle, strong middle cards, strong low-high cards, queen, jack 9, queen 10-8, etc. Those are boards that you should definitely be doing a whole lot of checking on. And you can confirm this. You can go through and use a program like Equilab or Range Analyzer to analyze the various ranges and how they interact. And you're going to see that those middle connected card boards, the high card middle connected boards, are quite bad for the 4-betters range, but also very, very good for the 3-better who call the 4-bets range. And when that's the case, you, as the 4-better, must be cautious. So don't think it's as easy as just continuation bet small every time. Because if you do that when you're starting to play relatively shallow stack, you may end up lighting a little bit of money on fire. So be careful, study this, study range advantage, and that's going to go a long way to helping you know how to play these scenarios. But we already covered the very common spots, so you should be good to go.
Reasonable. Which of the following are false as the 4-bet aggressor with the range advantage? Should use a lot of small bets. That's true. Play similarly to 3-bet pots. You should never go all in with a 4-better with the range advantage. That's not true. Sometimes you should go all in, particularly on very connected boards with a range. Like if you 4-bet and it comes off that, Queen 9-8 board, you probably just want to smash it in and just say, okay, the boards don't matter. Let's play our hands. And if somebody wants to call you with jacks at that point, okay. But you don't want to check and you don't want to bet small and give them a chance to outdraw you with their 6 outs. You'd rather they get committed and, have 75% equity against them with aces. So, that's... you should go in all in sometimes with a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio. As a matter of fact, I think that's going to be one of the more common bets because you're going to be 3-4 betting to 20 big blinds, and on 60, that puts 40 in the pot, man. So there's if it's a reasonable board that you could get drawn out on, just jam a lamb. Seems like the thing to do. When you 4-bet excuse me. When you 4-bet from the low jack and the cutoff calls, which board should you do more checking on? You should probably do more checking on this kind of board, just because it's misses your range, sets and straight combos, gives the caller a huge nut advantage. You should check 100% of your range on this board. The Queen 9-8 because it's so connected. The all monotone board you should actually be betting small on quite a bit, because when you are 4-betting, you have a lot of aces and kings, and if you have the ace or king of hearts in your hand on this board, you're just so statistically advantaged. It's ridiculous. So it's an equity smash, as I've called it. When you 4-bet from the low jack and the cutoff calls, okay, so we're out of position. If you are going to bet, which board should you use an all-in size on? Well, that's going to be the monotone board, because your ace king, your aces and kings and ace king with a heart, your king with a heart, things like that. Yeah, all in sizing is going to be used the majority of the time, I would imagine, because got to get it in when you're good, man. And it still takes quite a bit for people to call you, even with just a bare ace of hearts here, because they know they have to hit. And in all honesty, you could be taking outs away from them if you have a set of tens or set of queens rather, when the board pairs and they could just be drawing dead. So those are the ones. Which board should you check more often when you're the 4-better in the cutoff? So you're in position, facing a small blind call after the small blind checks flop. Which board should you check more often? No, I got it wrong. Low board does not connect well with the small blind's range. Right. Oh, so you should be bet more frequently on the... Oh, wait. So what does it say? Which board should you check more often? Okay. Duh. You're checking more often on this board because it hits the small blind's range so hard, and you can't protect against something that's already hit you. So, yeah, makes sense. I'm going to mark this as complete. I want to see how long the next section is. It's only a two-part section. So if it's reasonable, we'll just go through it right now and finish it up. Eight minutes. All right. 4-bet pots as the pre-flop caller. Let's do it. Let's finish up the 4-bet section.
Now let's discuss one more scenario in heads-up pots on the flop. That is when you are the pre-flop caller in a 4-bet pot. So pre-flop, essentially. Someone raises, you 3-bet, they 4-bet, you call. So let's first discuss when you are out of position facing a bet. In this scenario, just use the bet response flowchart as you've done when you're facing any bet. Don't know if we need to go through it again. I guess we might as well. Look at your hand type, junk, fold. Marginal made hands, call. Premium hands or draws, do we have the nut advantage? No, often call. Do we have the nut advantage? Yes, often raise. However, when you're shorter, you got to stick around a little bit wider and use smaller raise sizes. we're going to be short in this scenario because we're in a 4-bet pot, right? Because stack to pot ratio is going to be very shallow. And also, with shorter stacks, consider getting all in more often. And that's especially going to be true when you are out of position. So, being out of position, facing a bet, you're going to want to go all in with hands that are often strong but non-premium, because whatever hands your opponents have in their range has some equity. Quite often, if they're betting hands like ace king, ace jack offsuit, etc., if you're sitting there with top pair, middle pair, pretty much no matter what it is, your opponent with those 2 overcards has 16 outs twice. And if you check call their small flop bet, they're very often going to check the turn, and then they get to see the river, right? And by raising, often jamming from out of position, due to the stack to pot ratio being very shallow already, you deny their equity, which is fantastic. Anytime you can make your opponent fold out 20, 25% equity, that is pretty great, especially if your hand's going to generally play poorly on the turn and river anyway, because the turn and river could be bad for your hand and significantly downgrade it. So out of position, that's what you want to do. In position, same story. Use the bet response flowchart, except for now you're going to want to do more calling. And that's because when you're in position, closing the action, getting good odds, you don't necessarily want to mess that up. If your opponent's out of position with their 6-out draw, that's okay. Let them keep bluffing, right? Because
that's the exact scenario that happened when we were going over the hands, where the board was ace 4-4, and I had raised, and the guy had called from out of position, and I had the ace king. That's exactly why, is because I'm checking in position because I want him to continue, bluffing. So it was just, call turn, call river. He happened to outdraw me. The guy had 5 outs, but it definitely isn't a mistake, because there's at no point where we can raise on a board of ace 4-4 3-5. There's at no point we can raise, get it all in with ace king, and be really happy, unless we're just against a bumbling fucking idiot who's like, I have ace 10. You know what I'm saying? Because of the way the betting structure went on the turn and river. But if he had missed that river, that bet on the river would have been much bigger. Therefore, it would have been a better situation for us. It just so happened that he got lucky. So you don't need to blast somebody off of a bad situation for them under the guise of protecting your hand. A lot of players are way too afraid to get drawn out on. You have to realize it's part of the game. And in order to maximize your value hands, when you don't get drawn out on, you can't be smashing the board and just overprotecting your obviously good hands. In reasonable situations like that, especially heads up, where you only have to worry about one opponent. You know what I'm saying? So the times you get drawn out on won't affect you as much, as long as you're getting paid on the times you don't get drawn out on. And you don't want to stand in the way of karma by betting yourself off the hand, betting the other player off of a good situation for you.
Happens is, if you call their flop bet, they see the turn, they check the turn, you can then bet and force them off of their equity at that point. So when you're in position, you should very often do a decent amount more calling. All right, now let's discuss as the pre-flop caller in position when checked to. If it goes check on the flop when you're out of position, you just go straight to the turn, right? So now this is when this player raises, you 3-bet, they 4-bet, you call, your opponent then checks out of position. We just discussed some of the common spots where the 4-better will check out of position. Usually that's when the flop is going to be decently good for the in-position player's range. Okay? That said, this spot really doesn't come up all that often unless the board is like those middle connected type boards. Understand, when the opponents do check out of position, they're very often going to have mostly hands that have some showdown value, like good ace highs or under pairs or something like that. And they will be trapping every once in a while. Remember how we discussed in the previous section. As the 4-better, you are going to want to trap with your best hands to make sure you are protecting your checking range. So, as general rules for the in-position player, they're going to want to do a lot of checking in this spot. And that's because whenever you do have a little bit of an advantage, you don't necessarily want to be betting very, very frequently. There are going to be some spots, mainly on that queen 10-8 board or queen 9-8 or jack 9-8, those types of boards, where you will want to be betting very frequently because you have a big equity advantage. But for the most part, you're just not, and that's going to result in you doing mostly checking. That said, when we are betting, a small size is usually preferred, and you're going to find that premium made hands and draws often bet, and marginal made hands and junk often check. Okay? Let's take a look at
Reasonable.
just a few examples of the spots where you should expect your opponents to be checking. Let's say 60 big blinds deep in the small blinds. This is where cutoff raises, you 3-bet small blind, they 4-bet you, you call, you check the flop, they bet 25% pot on 8, 6, 5. Take a look at our range, realize it's not actually...
You have to remember, when you're getting 4-bet, basically the ranges are getting more and more narrow. So this is just mainly for me. You're not getting 4-bet by pocket 8s. You know, it's just not, you know, or 6s or 5. It's just not happening. Occasionally you run into a wild man who will 4-bet with, you know, the 10 jacks and weird hands like that. But that's fine because they're going to go broke when they hit that one pair. So when you have situations like aces and shit like that and you're out of position, it's a check call all day. And once the player bets 25% pot, we're talking about 40 blinds in the pot. They're only betting 10. Once you call that, you have 30 blinds left. There's 50 in the pot. So how easy is it to get all your money in with a great hand like aces in this scenario? It's pretty fucking easy. You know what I'm saying? Even if the turn goes check, check, you can just jam river, and you're going to be surprised how often you're going to get called by the shitty overpair of 10s or jacks or even top pair when the person decided to do something wacky with, you know, ace 8 and they fucking hit the 8 on the flop or something like that. You'd be surprised because people always think all-in bets are bullshit in these scenarios after you've shown weakness on the flop, but it's 90% of the time patently the opposite.
Actually all that strong, right? We have aces, which is really good, and jacks and 10s and 9s, which are really good. But everything else is kind of marginal, right? Like ace queen's pretty bad, king queen suited is pretty bad, queen jack suited is pretty bad. So this is a spot where...
Again, we don't have kings and queens because we would 5-bet those all in from out of position because it would be insane to take a flop with those and just let an ace hit and just fuck us versus somebody who could be having ace queen or offsuit or even ace jack suited. We'd rather just smash it all in and let them make the fold pre-flop or take the worst of it at 70-30 versus our kings or queens.
We don't really want to do a ton of raising. Notice though we're not really folding all that much either because we're facing a small flop bet. And if you think about the hands that make logical sense to fold, the only ones in this range that make some sense to fold are going to be hands like king queen and ace queen, but realize that the calling range we have contains aces and jacks and some 10s and some 9s, which is quite strong, right? So given you have aces, jacks, 10s, and 9s in your calling range, that will allow you to call with ace, queen, and even some king, queen suited. If you told me you wanted to call all ace, queens and fold out king, queen suited, I'd probably tell you that's fine. Notice some king, queen suited likes to rip it all in. It's basically the draw that lacks showdown value here. So that's pretty neat. Also notice that the draws that raise the most often are, again, these strong but vulnerable overpairs, right? Whereas aces is not so vulnerable to being outdrawn, therefore it opts to call instead. Notice also, though, when you are jamming out of position, you are going all in, even with a 60 big blind stack in this scenario, right? And if we were shallower stacked, then, of course, we're all in as well. What about on queen 9-8? So this is a spot where low jack raises, cutoff 3-bets, low jack 4-bets, cutoff calls. Flop comes, low jack bets 25% pot. And, oh, I'm sorry, they're checking. Here they're checking. Remember, this is the board where the out-of-position player should check every time. Even I get confused sometimes. This is a spot where out-of-position players should be checking 100%. And this is a spot where the in-position player...
This illustrates how our 3-bet and then call of a 4-bet puts us in this range for this queen 9-8 board, rainbow. It puts our range squarely in the middle of that. 10s, jacks, 9s, ace, queen, all those hands are calling pre-flop. Queen, jack, king, queen, all those kind of things like that. So when we get check to, we need to be betting a quarter pot because we do have good equity. We do have, and we have our opponent in a really bad position because they are aware of this. That's why that they're checking, you know what I'm saying? And they're going to have a lot more ace kings than we are in this scenario. So it's very reasonable for us to have ace queens. It's very reasonable for us to have king queens. It's reasonable to have jacks and 10s, which have a ton of equity on these boards. You know, it's reasonable to have a set of 9s. So betting a quarter pot with all these things kind of just really screws up your opponent and most likely will win you the pot immediately. I've even been in some weird situations where I've had, you know, weirder hands that don't line up with this board, but knowing this knowledge, having a hand like, you know, I think like a king 10 or something like that versus for the aggressive player, and betting this flop has won me the pot many times, and it's just that small bet because it's just like, okay, they've they've defined their hand, they've missed the board, and now this board smashes our range. Let's go ahead and bet small. And even in that small bet, they cannot continue with the hands that are up against this range and this board. It's just so hard for them. Our equity is, 67%. That's crazy. That's huge. And when it's that high, you should always be betting.
Has a huge equity advantage. Remember I said this board lines up great with the the 3-better who called the 4-bet? Well, take a look at it, right? Aces, jacks, 10s, 9s. All these hands are very good here. Like if you bet 10s, you can just happily get it all in. Queen jack is great. King queen is great. Ace queen is great. I mean, this board just nails the 3-betters range, right? So in this scenario, they're betting very, very frequently, usually using a tiny size because they have a big equity advantage. Remember, equity advantage is very, very important in these spots. The bigger your equity advantage, the more frequently you're betting. So nice spot to bet. Usually small with everything. And then one more. Here we have low jack versus cutoff again. And this is on the ace queen 5 board. This is the pretty bad board, right? This is the board that connects generally pretty well with the initial, with the 4-better. So in this scenario, when they're betting...
General rule of thumb is 4-better is more likely to have higher cards. So when higher cards come off, it's better, and an ace is obviously the highest card. So the 4-better is the most likely guy to have ace king. Now, interestingly, we're the most likely person to have ace queen as the caller. So this is a scenario where ace queen, I'd rather have ace queen here than aces, honestly, because it's just so much more likely that our opponent has ace king and we just have them nutted. So for me, that's a perfect scenario where we're going to see a bet from the low jack on the flop. We're going to take our time and call with the ace queen. They're probably going to check the turn, and then the river's going to come off. And usually the greatest scenario, and this happened to me yesterday, is where like the river comes off and pairs 5s. So the board's like ace queen 5, deuce 5, right? So now they may think we're going for the free bluff. And I did this yesterday in this exact scenario where I had top 2 pair, but it looks like we could have ace jack and be going for the bluff. So they bet small on the flop. We called. Turn got checked. They check river. And I just overbet jammed the river for like 1.2x pot. And the players snap called me with ace king because they're like, nobody's he's trying to get a free bluff through with ace jack because he thinks it's aces and 5s with a queen. But I actually have ace king, so it's aces and 5s with a king. Meanwhile, I rolled over the ace queen, and the player was eliminated from the tournament, and I got his bounty. So it's knowing the dynamic of those hands. I much prefer to have ace queen on this board than aces because I'm going to get paid, and I'm going to get paid fucking huge. But little thing to understand about that dynamic there. Ace 5, not so much, because we're not going to have ace 5 in our range. But coincidentally, if you do sometimes versus a very aggressive player, it's a very similar scenario, but I think raising the flop is better because nobody's going to raise ace queen on this flop. So you're going to get it in versus ace king much more easily when you have top and bottom pair. It's also a good one for if you had a set of 5s here just randomly. That would be a good one to raise too.
Small, you should be overfolding. Notice you do have a few nut hands, aces, ace queen, but that's it, right? And notice jacks, 10s, and 9s just all opt to fold immediately. Jack 10 has a gut shot, which is like, marginal. If you tell me you want to fold the gut shot, it's probably okay. But notice you're already folding 43%. King, queen, queen, jack can't really justify folding. If you do call the flop with a hand like queen, jack, by the way, and your opponent bets the turn, you probably are supposed to fold it out. Because if you think about the bottom of your range here, the bottom of your check calling range on the flop is jack 10, which obviously folds to a turn bet when you miss. And then queen, jack, which is basically the bottom of your range. And it's fine to fold out the bottom of your range on each betting round. Kind of neat to see ace queen raises, but also pocket 9s every once in a while. Good luck with that. This is a spot where I'm literally never raising in this spot. I'm just calling everything, and that's going to play pretty well. So as you see, like usually in these scenarios, you are going to be able to navigate these spots decently well because your 4-betting range is already going to be pretty tight, pretty reasonable. You just have to consider how your range lines up with your opponents, and you need to be able to accurately figure out who has the equity advantage within reason, right? Like you need to be able to look at ace queen 5 and realize that's very different than queen 9 8 just because of the way the board interacts with your range. And these are the common spots where you're going to be in like reasonable shape. Well, not this spot, not ace queen 5, but like queen jack 9, 8 7, 8 6 5. These are spots where you're okay, but most of the time you're going to be in pretty bad shape in this scenario when you are calling the 4-bet, and that's going to result in you often just folding to bets when you have your junk, calling with your marginal hands, And when you're out of position, doing a bit more raising than calling, in position doing a bit more calling than raising when you're facing that bet.
Pretty reasonable stuff.
Oh, are you still streaming?
Still almost done. As the pre-flop caller out of position in a 4-bet pot, facing a flop bet, you should jam with non-nut strong hands more often than nutted hands. Very true. Because your hands need protection. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, and you don't need to protect the nuts because it's the nuts. As a pre-flop caller in position, when facing a 4-bet pot, you should raise often and call rarely. That is false. Hello? Yes. False. The concept is seen through the flop section. You're in position, do little raising, lots of calling because you get to close the action. You get to allow the player to keep bluffing at you. All that stuff makes good sense. We're going to mark this as complete, and I believe that covers the entire 4-betting section. It's a short section, but then again, you know, we're talking about 60 big blinds, which is a rarity. So 4-betting, I think, more should be more common in the early levels of tournaments. That's when I do it more, or when I'm just massively chip leading in later stages in tournaments. But at the same time, you don't need too much in tournaments because you're just not going to be living at these levels a lot. You're going to be living at 40 big blinds. That's why most of the tournament sections, unless specifically stated like this one, we're talking about 40 big blinds because you're not 4-betting 40 big blinds very often. You're just getting the money in after a 3-bet. So we're going to mark this complete, and we're going to take a look at the next section that we're going to pick up probably tomorrow, maybe the next day because tomorrow is Sunday. I may be playing more, but I'm probably going to play tournaments today, so I might not even play tomorrow. Yeah, so short stack strategy. Look at how much more there is to short stack strategy than there was to 4-betting. This is, you know, because this is where you live in tournaments at 40 and below blinds. So this is the exciting part to me. This is the fun stuff. This is the stuff where people comes up in streams and people are like, why are you re-raising with, you know, 15 big blinds? Why are you not just jamming? It's because there are situations where you should be re-raising, and it's not like I have aces there. Sometimes it's 10 jack, sometimes it's whatever. You'll see those examples come up here. So as it goes, I think that's pretty good to end it here for today. A lot of good, dense information here. This is another good one to go back. It'll be on YouTube in the next hour or two. Just make sure you go ahead and go through this a few times. Also, the hand reviews. I know not many people were here for that. It was at the beginning of the episode. A lot of good hands from yesterday that we reviewed. A lot of fun ones. A lot of easily implementable 3-bet pot strategy stuff that I saw that morning and implemented that night perfectly. So really interesting stuff, a lot of fun. I'm not going to raid anybody. There's not too many people here. So I'll see you guys later. I'm probably going to play. I want to play tournaments, but I have a bunch of things to do. So maybe it'll just be cash, but we'll see. And I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.